This past weekend, I decided to invest some time to peruse the Quran, and to my regret, it was a colossal waste of time. Started from the first chapter, after I got through it halfway. I noticed the Quran was more like a book written on a whim, with many of its passages leaving out critical details. After reading the first two chapters, it struck me that this book couldn't have been written by a sane person. In fact, it was more like a deranged individual with a serious mental disorder had written the Quran. There are a lot of verses in the Quran praising Allah for being the most gracious and most merciful. It is like the author of the Quran wanted the readers to become reassured that there is no doubt these are the true attributes of Allah. Muslims would generally use these verses to make the claim that Islam is in fact a religion of peace. On the contrary, in Surah 2 verse 216, it establishes the obligatory nature of jihad. The verse says, "Fighting in Allah's cause is ordained for you Muslims, though you dislike it." It may be that you dislike a thing, and it is good for you, and it may be that you like a thing, and it is bad for you. Allah knows, but you do not know. In this verse, Allah tells His believers it is ordained for them to fight even if they dislike it, and fighting is good for them. I know many Muslims will try to dispute that this is not how you interpret this verse. This verse conveys a different meaning. With that, I can only tell them it is in clear writing, and you can read what the verse says as the way it was articulated by Allah. I don't need to hear the arguments from other Muslim scholars, because in this verse it clearly says fighting is ordained for Muslims whether they like it or not, because it is good for them. So even those who do not want to engage in fighting, they will be obligated to do it, since fighting is ordained for Muslims by Allah. Another verse that raises some questions is verse 48 from chapter 3, titled The Family of Imran. This verse says, "And he will teach him the scripture and wisdom, and the Torah and the gospel." In this verse, he is referred to Allah, and him is referred to Jesus, since this verse was talking about Jesus. In the English translation done by Yusuf Ali, this verse says, "And Allah will teach him the book and wisdom, the law and the gospel." The word book and scripture was used in both of these translations, and we know the Torah was given to Moses when he led the Israelites out of Egypt. The gospel was believed to be a new scripture that Allah had introduced to Jesus. But what about the book or scripture that was mentioned in this verse? The Quran also referred to itself as the book or scripture in its contents. Now it begs the question, since the Quran was revealed to Muhammad, who came generations after Jesus. So then why the Quran was mentioned in this verse? Another verse that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever is verse 31 in Surah Al-Baqarah. This verse says, "He taught Adam the names of all things. Then he presented them to the angels and said, 'Tell me the names of these, if what you say is true.'" All things in this verse, I don't think only refer to different animals alone. I believe it also refers to all the plants, minerals, and other things that existed in this world around Adam's time. With that being said, we know even today we still continue to discover new species that have never been identified before, and only the taxonomists get to name these new species after they have a careful look at other similar species, work out which genus the new species is in, or it may be a new genus too, and give it a name closest to its closest relative. So, to say Allah taught Adam the names of all things, including other things that Adam had never seen before, and then presented all these things to the angels, sounds pretty silly. Another thing I had noticed is that Allah had prescribed all these obligations for the Muslims to follow, and Muslims are expected to follow what's told in the Quran blindly, without questioning anything and finding a reasoning behind what they are asked to follow. In verse 150 of Surah Al-Baqarah, part of this verse says, "Wherever you are, O Prophet, turn your face towards the sacred mosque, and wherever you believers are, face towards it." Here Allah ordered His prophets and believers to face towards the sacred mosque when they pray, but Allah never furnished the reason to help us understand why He did this. Also, again in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 196 says, "Complete the pilgrimage and minor pilgrimage for Allah one. But if prevented from proceeding, then offer whatever sacrificial animals you can afford. and do not shave your heads until the sacrificial animal reaches its destination. But if any of you is ill or has a scalp ailment requiring shaving, then compensate either by fasting, charity, or a sacrificial offering. In times of peace, you may combine the pilgrimage and minor pilgrimage, then make the sacrificial offering you can afford. Whoever cannot afford that offering, let them fast 3 days during pilgrimage and 7 after returning home, completing 10. These offerings are for those who do not live near the sacred house, and be mindful of Allah and know that Allah is severe in punishment. According to this verse, we see that Allah requires the Muslims to fulfill another religious obligation at least once in their lifetime, the Hajj, which is also one of the 5 pillars of Islam. We know for fact that a lot of Muslims are not able to afford to go to Hajj, especially for those who do not live in Saudi Arabia, so they would need a lot of money to pay for the flight and hotel accommodations for the duration of their Hajj. With that being said, even though Hajj is compulsory, only those who have the financial ability to spend that kind of money get to go, and those who are poor will only get deprived of this opportunity. With that being said, the Quran does depict Allah as all-knowing and all-merciful, and as well as someone who loves the poor people. So if that is the case, then why does Allah, as a God that detests greed, would allow Saudi Arabia to continue capitalizing on the Hajj? Saudi Arabia earns an average of $10 to $15 billion a year from the Hajj, and another $4 to $5 billion from the 8 million visitors making the Umrah. According to Muslims, Allah is an omnipotent God. Nothing can faze Allah. So if Allah is the real God, like the Muslims have claimed, it would not be a difficult task for him to make it possible for all Muslims to perform the Hajj if he had made it compulsory. With that being said, we can conclude that Allah wasn't real, but just a figment of imagination concocted by Muhammad. Nowadays we see a war in Gaza is brewing, and people are the ones who use the media to garner support and get donations from other people to help out the people in Palestine. It doesn't matter how often the Muslims make supplications to Allah for help, just as in this ongoing Palestine war, and as well as those Muslims who are eager to go to Hajj but cannot afford the money, Allah never answers back, because He is non-existent.